there's actually another clue specific to Ohio that gave this away. If you look around carefully, there's these small holes all around it, and there's actually signs of bark peeling off. And in Ohio and other areas around here, we've had problems with the emerald ash borer, which has pretty much wiped out most of the ashes.
Here we have an emerald ash borer. The good news is that it's dead. The bad news is it was first identified in Vermont this summer, and in Washington County around July, and subsequently it has been identified in Bennington County in Pownell, and also in Grand Isle County up in North Hero.
Like when I'm listening to crickets, could there be as many crickets as there are emerald ash borers one day?
Yes. In places where it's occurred for a while, like Wisconsin, where there's literally millions of acres being affected, I'm sure it's millions of insects.
Today I'm with forester Alan Calfee, and he's going to match the facts with hysteria when it comes to this bug.
Here we have a white ash. The species the Latin name for the species is Fraxinus. And
they get pretty big.
There are a number, this is a white ash, but we also have green ash and brown ash and black ash in Vermont, and they're all susceptible to emerald ash borer.
Are there any ash in Vermont that are not susceptible to this damn thing?
No. The emerald ash borer it only uses ash species, but it uses all the varieties of ash.
And how important a tree is this to Vermont?
Well, especially to us down here in southern Vermont, it's a very important tree. I mean, if you look around, there's actually probably 35 to 40% of this forest is white ash.
In southern Vermont?
In southern Vermont. Well, in this, where we're standing.
In this area, okay.
For the state of Vermont, it represents about 5% of the total tree species for the 4.5 million acres of forest land, but remember that includes the Northeast Kingdom and high elevation and places where ash doesn't grow. So it sounds like a little number, but here in the Taconics especially, it's an important species, and there's a lot of it in our forest.
Is this an important logging tree? Is this a money tree for loggers?
White ash is a pretty valuable species. Here we have a mill not far from us that makes tool handles. A worldwide known tool manufacturer that uses ash for tool handles, and they also make blanks for baseball bats.
Got it. So can you just give us a sense of time? When do I see it attacking my trees?
It's a very good question. Remember that the insect first showed up in Michigan in 2002, probably as a byproduct of shipping pallets or something like that off of boats. From China, and it's slowly now spread to about 34 states, and only just been identified in Vermont in July in one location, but since that, now it's October, now they've found 4 other locations in Vermont where it's identified. Its speed of spread is strictly governed by human transportation. So the insect itself travels very slowly, they found. It does not disperse quickly, is not capable of flying very far.
I see.
But it's either on firewood or on other products that are being moved around. That's how it's spreading. So someone could bring a load of firewood from Washington County down to their house in Manchester with emerald ash borer on it, in the period really between May and June when the adults are out flying, and we'll have it in Manchester.
We don't know how fast it's going to take over the state.
No.
You and I could be dead by the time it finally does that?
We would hope. I mean, we live a long time, and it takes a long time for it to spread.
But that's not like an outrageous question, that it could take many years for it finally to be like Iowa, and it has now taken over the entire state.
Yes, yeah, decades.
Right. We hope.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and that's one reason why people that study forest health and that type of thing don't want people to react hysterically. The Commissioner of Forests and Parks has a great quote, is don't be rash with your ash.
So who cares if we lose this tree? I mean, aren't there a whole bunch of trees we've already lost? I mean, have we lost any other trees?
That's a really good point, Haas, because we've lost the American chestnut, which used to be well represented in this forest, American elm, which you'll still find immature trees, but they never grow to adulthood. We're losing our butternut to a fungus. American beech is also under onslaught by an exotic, meaning a pest that was brought from somewhere else.
Let's pretend this beautiful tree is in my front yard, and it's been there. How long do these things live for?
They can. Ash is a longer lived species, so they can live 100 years.
All right, so how do I know my beautiful ash tree is infected?
What happens is the adult beetles emerge in the springtime, and they fly on the tree, and they lay their eggs actually on the bark of the tree, and the eggs hatch later in the summer, and the beetles bore in just below the bark into what we call the cambium, and they create these S-shaped galleries where they feed in the cambium. And then the adults exit the tree, and the emergent hole is a D-shaped hole. So it's flat on one side and round on the other.
Okay.
Very small. We saw the size of the insect, so you can imagine that. So you can see those D-shaped emergent holes. But what's turned out to be really more useful in identifying the presence of the insect is when the woodpeckers find the tree with the beetles in it, they start to peck at the bark and fleck it off, and you can see what would happen. You start to get this, it's being known as a blonding pattern. This whole side of the tree would have this kind of look to it, blonding. And that's something you can see at a distance, whereas a 1/4 of an inch D-shaped hole is very hard to find. Probably at that stage there's going to be some dieback in the very tips of the tree too.
Got it.
Because basically the insect cuts off the flow of nutrients and water to the crown of the tree by, it kind of girdles the tree. You might also see white ash has a stress response when it's starting to have problems in its crown. It'll produce these sprouts at the base of the tree, which is called a witch's broom. A big clump of branches coming right off the stump of the tree. As the tree is dying, it's basically trying to put out more photosynthetic leaves so it can make up for what it's losing.
So by the time you see that, the tree's probably past saving.
Yeah, yeah. If the tree is in your front yard, there are pesticides that are labeled for use for this particular insect, but you have to start using that before the insect shows up. So if the insect's in your tree, it's too late.
So here's the thing, we don't know how fast they're going to reach Manchester.
Right.
So if you have one of these beautiful trees in the front of your building, you want to start spraying now.
Yeah, yeah.
Or sometime soon.
Yes, and it's probably an expensive proposition.
So,
so you're going to really want to love that tree.
Right.
And there are other things that can damage the tree besides this insect. So it's a bit of a gamble, which is why really it's not talked about much. It's not effective, and certainly in a forest, it's not an effective means of controlling the pest.
When I was reading up in Iowa, they said the state is 100% quarantine now. And that sounds to me like it means you can't really move stuff out. Is that true?
So Vermont similarly is under a quarantine statewide.
Okay.
For example, New Hampshire has chosen to do it county by county, and fundamentally what it means is you can't move ash material, particularly when the adults are flying, so May through July, outside of the quarantine area. With firewood,
yeah, firewood's
as a
the big
product,
one, right?
Firewood, really shouldn't, they advise you not to move it more than 50 miles, but you're not allowed to move it outside of the state's boundaries. So even though there is emerald ash borer in New York, you cannot move firewood to New York.
Okay, so are we sort of being hysterical? I mean, I know that Rutland's thinking about being proactive and wiping out ash on public property or something, and I know that Londonderry's talking about it, and Arlington's talking about it, and everyone doesn't know, and we heard that if you wait till it's die, then it's much more expensive to get rid of it as opposed to bringing in tree services now when it's alive.
Yes.
Should I kill everything?
And I think, you know, for urban centers, cities and villages and stuff like that, they're learning from what's happened in other places that have been infested, where the trees die, the branches start to rot, the trees start to fall apart. Now all of a sudden you have this huge safety problem. And so in some ways being proactive like that is trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit. For the people who own forest land and who manage forest land, the state is really advising folks not to rush out and cut all your ash trees down for a couple different reasons. One is that it's not here yet. So if we went to this forest and started immediately cutting all the trees down,
kind of silly.
It's going to have a bit of a chain effect for some of those other organisms and things that depend on white ash. The other thing is that actually there has been some research that shows there is some genetic resistance in trees to the pest. So if we go out and we cut all our ash trees, we may very well be removing that genetic material that has the solution.
Before I let you go, final thoughts. Now, talking here makes me realize that thank God there's nothing killing the maples, but then I realized, no, that's kind of stupid because there is something that's killing the maples. It's just not
here yet.
Here yet.
Yeah, Asian longhorn beetle.
Is it coming?
Well, it could, the same way with the emerald ash borer, it could be transported in the trunk of somebody's car with a load of firewood if they came from, you know, Worcester, Mass, or somewhere where there's been a big outbreak to Vermont. It turns out that that one spreads very slowly and it's fairly easy to identify and control. I say easy, I mean, Worcester, I think, cut 100,000 trees down, so it cost a few dollars.
So, that's final thoughts. What do you got?
So I guess, Haas, to me, what I really hope that everybody understands is that our forests are really important. And in the whole discussion of climate change and carbon issues, the forest turns out to be really important because the trees capture carbon from the air and put them into their stems. So it's really helping us in that regard. It also turns out that the forests themselves have an effect on climate. So areas that have more forests, there tend to be a moderating effect with the climate there. And our forests here in Vermont are under a lot of different threats from changing climate. Some of these bugs we've talked about, that really we need to be careful in how we take care of our forests, and maybe more than anything try to keep as much land and forest, keep the forest as much as possible.